what first drew me into it was Denisova Cave in Siberia. I think everybody's heard of the Neanderthals, and these days I think everybody's heard of the Denisovans as well.
The first sound was unlike anything ever heard before. Not the hum of wind through stone, not the guttural call of modern primates, but a structured vibration reconstructed from fragments of long-extinct anatomy. When artificial intelligence finally pieced together the phonetic map of Neanderthal vocal cords, it did not just simulate noises, it reconstructed an entire system of communication that had been silent for more than 40,000 years. The moment was staggering. For the first time, modern humanity heard the echoes of a sibling species whose existence had always seemed locked in bones, tools, and fossils. Suddenly, the gap between what we thought we knew about them and what they could tell us themselves narrowed to almost nothing. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The decoding of the Neanderthal language was not a matter of luck or accident. It was the result of years of layering machine learning models onto biological and archaeological evidence. Researchers had scanned the hyoid bones, the delicate structures in the throat that shape speech, and mapped airflow simulations based on ribcage mechanics. AI then processed countless linguistic datasets from human languages, both living and extinct, to identify patterns that would have been physically possible given Neanderthal anatomy. What emerged was not a set of random grunts, but a coherent language system. Structured, expressive, and astonishingly close to what we recognize as human communication. The revelation was less about sound alone and more about the realization that Neanderthals had been storytellers, negotiators, teachers, and perhaps even poets in their own right. The implications of this breakthrough radiate outward into almost every field of human inquiry. Anthropology has long debated whether Neanderthals possessed symbolic thought, whether they could conceptualize abstract ideas or merely imitate patterns. AI's reconstruction of their language provided evidence that their mental worlds were not confined to survival needs. They had words that suggested categorization, relational thought, and even hypothetical reasoning. This alone forces us to reimagine their communities not as scattered tribes of survivalists, but as cultures rich with conversation, myth, and social depth, where once we saw crude carvings and assumed decoration, now we might hear the stories behind them. For linguists, the discovery was equally profound. Neanderthal language displayed both familiar and alien features. Its syntax carried echoes of Proto-Indo-European, suggesting deep common ancestry with the families of languages spoken today. Yet there were also structural divergences. Tonal elements more akin to modern Southeast Asian languages, rhythm patterns closer to certain African tongues. These combinations implied that the human capacity for language had branched earlier than assumed, with parallel systems evolving and thriving before collapsing into the singular dominance of Homo sapiens' linguistic traditions. In other words, language itself was never the monopoly of our species. It was a shared evolutionary inheritance, now partially recovered. The emotional impact of decoding this language cannot be overstated. Imagine hearing a reconstructed Neanderthal lullaby, the soothing rise and fall of sound designed to comfort a child beside a fire. Imagine translating a hunting strategy once shared in whispers under starlit skies. The boundary between them and us becomes porous, dissolving into recognition. AI did not just give us access to information, it gave us a bridge to empathy. It let modern humanity encounter Neanderthals not as primitive caricatures, but as beings whose voices carried intention, desire, fear, and love. This technology also redefines how we approach lost languages more broadly. If AI could reconstruct Neanderthal communication from partial anatomical data, then extinct human tongues, those of vanished civilizations and cultures, are no longer beyond recovery. Languages without written records might be partially revived through analysis of oral traditions in descendant communities, combined with deep learning reconstructions of likely phonetic pathways. This opens possibilities not just for science but for cultural restoration, giving voice to ancestors whose songs and stories seemed lost to time. The achievement did not come without challenges. Teaching an AI to generate a language requires boundaries. Otherwise, it risks inventing rather than reconstructing. To avoid fantasy, researchers tethered the system to physical constraints: the resonance of Neanderthal chest cavities, the thickness of their vocal cords, and the airflow capacities inferred from lung volume. Every simulated syllable had to obey the laws of biology. Beyond anatomy, AI cross-referenced with archaeological context. The presence of symbolic artifacts, burial practices, and tool complexity all suggested layers of social meaning that would demand a corresponding vocabulary. Slowly, piece by piece, a lexicon emerged that fit both form and function. The decoding also sharpened debates about the relationship between Neanderthals and modern humans. For decades, genetic evidence had shown interbreeding, leaving traces of Neanderthal DNA in many living populations. Now, with their language partially reconstructed, the interaction feels less clinical and more intimate. What conversations happened between the two species when they met? Were there shared words, compromises, or even blended dialects? AI's work hints that communication was not only possible, but perhaps more common than assumed. These encounters were not silent exchanges of goods or gestures. They may have been conversations, negotiations, even friendships forged in words. The philosophical implications ripple further. For centuries, humans defined themselves as the singular species with complex language, setting us apart from all others. That wall of distinction has now cracked. If Neanderthals had their own structured language, then they occupied the same cognitive territory we once claimed exclusively. This demands humility. The story of human uniqueness must be rewritten, not as a tale of one chosen species, but as a chorus of voices, some silenced by time yet now faintly heard again. AI's decoding does not diminish humanity. It enlarges the circle of beings we recognize as participants in the grand narrative of language. The event also reshaped how technology is viewed in relation to history. Too often, AI is imagined only as a tool for the future, automating industries, generating new art, forecasting markets. Yet here it functioned as a time machine, reaching backward to retrieve voices from prehistory. This reframing matters. It suggests AI is not merely a forward-driving force, but also a medium of remembrance, capable of reviving what was thought irretrievably gone. In doing so, it expands the role of technology from utility to cultural archaeology, blending precision with imagination. Even the mechanics of how AI handled uncertainty proved revealing. No one could guarantee absolute accuracy in reconstructing a language without living speakers. Instead of presenting a definitive system, AI offered probability maps of possible phonemes and syntax. This probabilistic approach mirrored how evolution itself works: trial, error, variation. In this way, the method honored the reality of language as a living, shifting entity rather than a frozen artifact. It created not a static museum piece, but a breathing simulation, one that might evolve as new evidence emerges. The cultural imagination has already been ignited by this event. Artists envision Neanderthal plays staged in their own language. Historians dream of recording documentaries with reenacted dialogues. And educators imagine students hearing the voices of ancient relatives alongside classical literature. Beyond entertainment, the potential lies in reshaping identity. To know that another branch of humanity spoke, laughed, argued, and perhaps sang, makes our shared evolutionary tree feel far richer, its roots deeper and more entangled. It places us within a tapestry rather than on a pedestal. At the same time, ethical questions arose. Should we attempt to translate Neanderthal words into modern equivalents, risking distortion? Or should we let their language remain partly foreign, respecting its autonomy? How do we prevent commodification, using reconstructed Neanderthal speech for marketing or trivial novelty, while preserving its dignity as a cultural achievement? AI's power to decode voices comes with responsibility, reminding us that reviving the past requires reverence, not exploitation. These conversations continue, shaping how the decoded language will be used in years to come. Scientific fields adjacent to linguistics also gained from the discovery. Cognitive science now has a new dataset to test theories of language acquisition. Did Neanderthal infants learn speech patterns in similar developmental stages as modern humans? Could their brains have processed metaphor, irony, or humor? Early AI reconstructions suggest yes, that their communication complexity required neurological sophistication akin to our own. This reshapes debates about the evolution of consciousness itself, challenging linear narratives of human progress. Consciousness may have been plural, emerging in parallel species, each contributing to the experiment of intelligence on Earth. The decoded language also invites reflection on mortality and memory. Species vanish, civilizations fall, voices fade, but perhaps not forever. With tools capable of reconstructing the echoes of the dead, we confront a new kind of immortality. Neanderthals may no longer walk among us, but their speech now reverberates in laboratories, lecture halls, and perhaps soon in public spaces. They are not simply extinct, they are reintroduced into the cultural sphere, not as curiosities, but as conversational partners across time. That kind of resurrection shifts our perception of history as static. It becomes dynamic, with technology as the medium of reanimation. There is a poetic irony that AI, often criticized for alienating humans from authenticity, instead delivered one of the most authentic connections imaginable. Machines, trained on vast seas of data, reached into silence and pulled forth the voices of kin we had long forgotten. Far from distancing us from humanity, it brought us closer to it, teaching that the human story has always been shared, always plural. The hum of Neanderthal language reminds us that we are not the end of the story, but one chapter in a long dialogue of species, some lost, some living, all connected by sound and meaning. The breakthrough has only begun to ripple through society. Scholars now debate whether museums should host live demonstrations of the reconstructed language. Educators discuss how to integrate it into curricula to expand perspectives on human history. Communities wonder whether their own ancestral languages, once thought gone, could be similarly revived with the help of AI. In every case, the underlying truth remains. A silence stretching back tens of thousands of years has been broken, replaced by resonance. That resonance is not just sound, it is recognition, the realization that another humanity once thrived and spoke. The raw sound of Neanderthal speech revealed a texture that felt both strange and familiar. It had the deep resonance shaped by robust chests and throats, yet it carried rhythm and cadence that suggested intention, not randomness. Once AI modeled entire sentences, researchers were struck by the musicality embedded in the flow. Linguistic specialists compared it to an interplay of tones and stresses that reminded them of polyphonic chants. It was language that seemed built not only for conveying meaning, but also for carrying emotion, for imprinting memory, for wrapping practical instruction in a cloak of beauty. This complexity suggested that Neanderthals not only communicated facts, but also wove feeling into their words, ensuring that speech would resonate both cognitively and emotionally with listeners. The discovery pushed us to reconsider how language itself may have originated as a bridge between survival and aesthetic expression. Archaeologists who had long puzzled over symbolic carvings and cave markings now had a new lens through which to interpret them. Previously, abstract engravings in Neanderthal sites were often dismissed as crude or meaningless scratches, but once their vocal system was understood, those marks could be imagined as extensions of a verbal culture. Perhaps they were visual anchors for spoken myths or teaching aids paired with narrative traditions. Suddenly, artifacts once considered enigmatic seemed to pulse with potential context. AI did not just decode speech, it offered the key to reinterpreting the material culture of an entire species. What looked like random patterns on cave walls may, in truth, be fragments of a conversation carried out across generations. Anthropology had long struggled with the concept of Neanderthal intelligence. The assumption of their inferiority was rooted more in cultural bias than in evidence, but the absence of direct communication had reinforced stereotypes. The moment their speech patterns were reconstructed, those assumptions collapsed. Language is not just a tool, it is a mirror of thought. The layered structure, the range of symbolic capacity, and the subtle interplay of tonal inflection indicated a mind capable of abstraction. This was not a being trapped in instinct, but one that reasoned, imagined, and reflected. The presence of such communication forced scientists to expand their definition of intelligence. Neanderthals were no longer evolutionary curiosities. They were interlocutors from another branch of humanity. The breakthrough also reignited debates about cultural continuity. If Neanderthals possessed full linguistic capacity, their extinction becomes even more tragic and mysterious. Why did a species capable of sophisticated thought disappear? Were they absorbed into Homo sapiens communities, their words echoing faintly in our earliest vocabularies? Or did their voices vanish entirely, leaving only traces in genetic memory? AI provided a way to explore these questions not through speculation, but through linguistic reconstruction. By comparing patterns of reconstructed Neanderthal speech to early human proto-languages, researchers began identifying possible overlaps, shared roots that may suggest direct borrowing or shared ancestry. The tantalizing possibility emerged that fragments of their voices live on in the words we speak today. Linguists found themselves particularly fascinated by the flexibility of the reconstructed system. Unlike many modern languages with rigid grammatical rules, Neanderthal speech appeared to thrive on fluidity. Syntax allowed for variation without loss of meaning, creating a kind of linguistic adaptability well suited to nomadic life and oral storytelling. Words could shift position, tones could adjust, and still the meaning remained intact. This flexibility likely fostered creativity, enabling speakers to invent on the fly, to adapt speech to context, and to emphasize emotion or urgency through structural choices. Such discoveries not only enriched our understanding of their language, but also shed light on the evolution of linguistic diversity among humans. The discovery did not stop at academic inquiry. The reconstructed Neanderthal language began to permeate popular culture. Musicians experimented with layering their phonetic structures into compositions, creating haunting soundscapes that transported listeners into imagined prehistoric worlds. Filmmakers integrated the language into historical reconstructions, not as gimmickry but as a genuine attempt at immersion. Educators began crafting programs where children could learn basic Neanderthal phrases, bridging science with imagination. What had started as a specialized project in AI laboratories soon transformed into a cultural movement, bringing people into contact with deep time in ways that felt intimate and personal. Ethnographers began exploring the idea of what it meant to revive a language for a species that no longer exists. Unlike endangered human languages which come tied to living communities, Neanderthal speech could not return to daily use. Yet its reconstruction carried weight, reminding us that language is not just a utility but a cultural heritage. It symbolized the voices of ancestors, a recognition that humanity is not a singular story but a tapestry of coexisting species. The revival of their speech turned into an act of remembrance, a recognition that extinction does not have to mean silence. The language became a monument not carved in stone but spoken in air. The decoding also inspired new ways of thinking about the interaction between biology and culture. For the first time, scientists could trace how anatomy and environment shaped not just survival strategies, but also communication. Neanderthals living in colder climates developed speech that carried well across distances, with deep resonance able to cut through wind and snow. The tonal qualities reflected not only physical constraints, but also environmental adaptation. Language became a record of survival strategies encoded in sound. Such findings encouraged researchers to look at modern languages through a similar lens, interpreting accents, intonations, and phonetic habits as living fossils of environmental adaptation. In neuroscience, the reconstruction opened new inquiries into how brains process speech outside the familiar spectrum of modern human language. Listening to Neanderthal phonemes triggered unique neurological responses in experimental subjects. Some sounds engaged auditory pathways in unexpected ways, suggesting that our brains may carry dormant capacities shaped by ancestral exposure. This hinted at an intergenerational resonance. Perhaps human brains retain traces of having once shared the world with other speaking species. The implications for understanding cognitive evolution were immense, pointing toward a more intertwined history of thought than previously imagined. Technology itself was transformed by the achievement. AI systems had to be trained to navigate incomplete, fragmented data without veering into invention. This meant developing models capable of respecting uncertainty, of holding multiple possibilities in balance rather than collapsing them into single answers. The success of the Neanderthal project created a new paradigm for AI research. Systems designed not for predictive certainty, but for probabilistic exploration. This approach has already begun spilling into other disciplines, from medicine to climate science, where uncertainty is a constant and must be navigated with sensitivity rather than ignored. The decoding also sparked reflection on time as a dimension of communication. To speak a word in Neanderthal language today is to collapse millennia, to momentarily erase the gulf between past and present. Each reconstructed syllable becomes a portal, an act of time travel performed through sound. This reframing has philosophical consequences. It challenges the idea that the past is irrevocably gone. Instead, it becomes latent, waiting for the right tools to awaken it. Language becomes not only a human achievement, but a medium for reuniting with histories that seemed unreachable. The Neanderthal voice becomes proof that nothing is ever fully lost. The discovery also expanded the conversation around empathy and otherness. For centuries, depictions of Neanderthals framed them as brutish outsiders, foils for human superiority. But hearing their voices forces a shift. They are no longer abstract figures, they are speakers. To hear someone speak is to acknowledge their subjectivity, their interiority. AI's work thus compels us to dismantle prejudices not only about Neanderthals, but about the broader category of the other. It demonstrates that dignity arises from communication, that to recognize a voice is to grant kinship. This realization reverberates beyond archaeology, reminding us to listen more carefully to living voices marginalized in our present. Speculative fields too took inspiration. Writers of science fiction began envisioning scenarios where Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted linguistically, creating hybrid societies where dual languages interwove. Some imagined alternate histories where their speech systems evolved alongside ours, creating a multilingual human species with shared cultural complexity. Others projected forward, imagining how decoding Neanderthal speech could prepare us for communicating with non-human intelligences in the future, whether biological or artificial. The reconstruction became not only a window into the past, but a rehearsal for futures we have yet to encounter. Perhaps most moving was the impact on individuals who encountered the reconstructed voices. Listeners often described a sense of uncanny recognition, as though the sounds resonated in their bones. Some wept, reporting that they felt as if they were meeting distant relatives for the first time. Others described the experience as unsettling, a reminder of mortality and extinction. In every case, the voices stirred something deep, bypassing rational analysis and striking at the heart. This emotional response underscored the profound power of language, not just to convey meaning, but to bind listeners to speakers across time. From a methodological standpoint, the project pioneered interdisciplinary collaboration on an unprecedented scale. Linguists, geneticists, archaeologists, AI engineers, anthropologists, and even acousticians worked together to weave fragments of data into a coherent system. The project became a model for how science could transcend disciplinary boundaries, uniting specialists under a shared goal that no one field could achieve alone. This cooperative framework may well influence how future scientific endeavors are organized, showing that the most profound discoveries emerge at the intersection of diverse expertise. Another fascinating outcome was the exploration of how Neanderthal language may have influenced emotional life. The reconstructed tonal structures suggested that emotion was deeply embedded in communication. Unlike many modern languages that separate affect from content, Neanderthal speech seemed to blur the two, infusing meaning with feeling at every turn. This could imply that their social interactions were less about detached information exchange and more about holistic bonding. Language may have functioned as a social glue, reinforcing community cohesion by intertwining logic with emotion. Such insights challenge us to reconsider the role of language in our own societies where emotional richness is often stripped away in favor of efficiency. The resonance of the discovery also spread into education. Schools began designing experiential lessons where students could listen to Neanderthal words and attempt to reproduce them. This not only sparked curiosity about prehistory, but also cultivated an appreciation for linguistic diversity. Children exposed to the reconstructed speech often expressed awe, describing it as like hearing ghosts or like learning a secret code. These educational experiments underscored the power of the discovery not only to expand knowledge but to ignite imagination, bridging the gap between past and future generations. Religious and spiritual communities also grappled with the implications. For traditions that emphasize the uniqueness of human speech as a divine gift, the discovery that another species had possessed its own language raised profound theological questions. Was the sacred capacity for words broader than assumed? Could Neanderthals be considered part of the same spiritual continuum as modern humans? These discussions demonstrated that the impact of AI's decoding extended even into domains far removed from science. challenging belief systems to adapt and expand in response to new knowledge. Economic and technological industries also recognized applications. The techniques used to reconstruct Neanderthal language proved adaptable to other fields of data recovery, particularly in scenarios where only fragments remain. From reconstructing ancient musical instruments to piecing together degraded audio recordings, the methods pioneered for language revival began spawning innovations. What had begun as an attempt to reach across prehistory turned into a toolkit for preserving and reconstructing cultural heritage across eras. The boundary between past and present blurred once again. In political discourse, the decoding became a metaphor. Leaders and commentators spoke of finding the Neanderthal voice as a way of addressing silenced communities, of listening to those forgotten by history. While often symbolic, this language reflected the broader impact of the discovery. It reminded societies of the moral imperative to hear voices beyond their immediate sphere. If AI could restore the speech of a species gone for millennia, surely we could make greater efforts to listen to those still alive but unheard. The philosophical weight of the achievement continues to ripple. It forces us to rethink the category of human. If Neanderthals spoke, then humanity is not a single line but a network, a constellation of species sharing capacities we once reserved for ourselves alone. This recognition unsettles notions of superiority but enriches our understanding of kinship. The decoding does not diminish humanity, it multiplies it, expanding the boundaries of what it means to be part of the human family. Every syllable spoken in reconstructed Neanderthal tongue affirms that we are not alone in our heritage. When the reconstructed Neanderthal language entered the public sphere, it quickly became a tool for exploring entirely new dimensions of human creativity. One of the first unexpected developments came from the field of performance art. Actors, fascinated by the phonetic depth and unusual cadence of Neanderthal speech, began staging experimental plays written entirely in the reconstructed tongue. Audiences reported the sensation of being pulled into a different world, familiar in its emotional weight, but alien in its soundscape. The performances were less about understanding every word, and more about experiencing an atmosphere that transported people into an ancient consciousness. Theatrical productions found that the language itself carried a dramatic tension that no modern translation could capture, proving that sound alone can shift perception and emotional resonance. Poets and writers also embraced the reconstructed speech. By incorporating Neanderthal phonemes into verse, they explored how the rhythm of ancient sounds interacted with modern poetic forms. The result was a new literary movement that blurred the boundary between archaeology and artistry. These works did not aim for linguistic accuracy alone, but for aesthetic power, creating a hybrid form of storytelling that drew upon humanity's deepest roots. For readers and listeners, the fusion was both enchanting and unsettling, an encounter with a voice that belonged to the human story, yet spoke from its forgotten branches. In the realm of science, paleogenetics began to intersect with linguistics in novel ways. The decoding of Neanderthal speech prompted researchers to analyze whether genetic markers connected to vocal anatomy had influenced language structures. Early findings suggested that variations in genes related to breath control and auditory processing correlated with certain phonetic possibilities. This meant that Neanderthal speech was not simply a cultural artifact, but a genetic one as well, written into the body as much as into the mind. The recognition that language can be partially encoded in DNA opened vast new avenues for research into the biological underpinnings of communication. Another domain transformed by the discovery was virtual reality. Developers began building immersive simulations of Neanderthal life, incorporating the reconstructed language into interactive experiences. Visitors could wander through digital prehistoric landscapes, listen to campfire discussions, and even attempt to communicate with AI-driven Neanderthal avatars. These experiences provided a visceral connection to the past, making prehistory not a distant abstraction but a living environment. Educational institutions adopted these simulations to engage students, and museums integrated them into exhibitions, offering visitors the chance to not only see artifacts, but to hear the voices that once surrounded them. The implications also reached into diplomacy and intercultural studies. By studying how Neanderthal language structured its communication, scholars gained new insight into the variety of ways humans can frame negotiation, cooperation, and conflict resolution. The flexible syntax and tonal emphases of their speech suggested strategies for managing disagreement through layered meaning rather than direct contradiction. Linguistic anthropologists proposed that modern societies could learn from these ancient patterns, adopting modes of dialogue that prioritize adaptability and subtlety over rigid argument. The past, in this sense, offered models for the future of human interaction. Technology companies found themselves inspired in unexpected ways. The techniques used to reconstruct Neanderthal language were adapted into algorithms capable of recovering degraded audio signals in fields like forensic investigation and historical preservation. Recordings thought too damaged to restore were given new clarity. Their sounds lifted from static in much the same way that Neanderthal speech had been resurrected from silence. What had started as an archaeological experiment quickly proved useful in modern law enforcement, archival science, and even space exploration, where faint signals often carry critical information. One striking ripple effect occurred in the field of ethics. Scholars began debating the moral dimensions of reviving a voice from a species that no longer exists. Did reconstructing Neanderthal language mean we had a responsibility to treat their cultural memory with respect, as though it were a living heritage? Was it enough to study the language scientifically? Or should society also cultivate rituals of acknowledgement, memorials, ceremonies, or cultural spaces dedicated to honoring Neanderthal identity? These debates revealed that the discovery was not only about science, but about moral imagination, challenging humanity to extend ethical consideration beyond the boundaries of the living. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on AI decoding Neanderthal language for humanity's future? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.